Over 1,400 days. That is how long Scottie Scheffler went without missing a cut, until last Friday. At the Renaissance Club in Scotland, the world number one did something nobody expected. He shot 72 on Friday. Total score, even par. He missed the weekend by just 2 shots. For any other player, that is a bad week. For Scheffler, it is a shockwave. Because this was not just any missed cut. This broke a streak that started in 2022. 78 consecutive tournaments. 1,428 days of never packing his bags early. It ended on a windy July afternoon with a missed 6-foot putt on the 7th hole. Now, here is the part that changes everything. This streak was not just about pride. It was the foundation of something much bigger, something that extends far beyond the golf course. A run like this does not just build a legacy, it builds an empire, and empires are expensive to maintain. So when that empire suddenly shows cracks, the real question is not about swing mechanics or wind conditions. The question is this: how much is that streak actually worth? And when it disappears overnight, who feels the impact first? That is exactly what we are going to dig into. But before we get there, I want to hear from you. Do you think this missed cut actually changes how people see Scheffler, or is everyone overreacting? Drop your take in the comments. And if you are new here, hit subscribe, because what comes next might completely shift how you view the business behind golf's biggest star. But to understand what that empire lost, you first need to see exactly how the wheels came off. Thursday told one story: a solid 68 under par, 2 strokes clear of the projected cut line. Everything looked normal. Scottie was Scottie. Then Friday arrived, and the Renaissance Club stopped playing nice. 11. That was the hole where the nightmare started. Scottie's second hole of the day. A simple 3.5-foot putt for par. Routine. The kind he makes in his sleep. Except this time the ball lipped out. Just like that, a bogey. On 12, it got worse. A par 5. He hit a decent approach, but his chip rolled back into the sand. Another bogey. Suddenly the world number one was fighting just to survive the cut. Now, fast forward to the 7th hole. His 16th of the round. A 6-foot birdie putt. This was his chance to get back on track. Data Golf tracks these things. That putt had a 50% chance of going in. He missed, and in that moment those odds crashed to 25%. His hopes of extending the streak nearly cut in half on a single misread. Then came the 8th. He found the fairway. Perfect drive, but the ball settled into a divot. A patch of torn-up grass left by some other player hours earlier. His second shot came up short, landing in the sand. By the time he reached the 9th, his last hole, he needed birdie to survive. 7-iron in hand. He hit it well, but it landed soft. Too soft. His putt for birdie stopped 6 feet short. He missed again. That was the moment. No dramatic tantrum, no club throw, just a quiet walk off the green. Friday, July 10th. The streak ended not with a bang, but with a whimper, and the silence around that clubhouse told everyone watching that something much bigger had just shifted. Because a collapse like this does not happen in isolation. It echoes, and the louder that echo gets, the more people start asking the one question nobody wants to answer. What happens when the unbeatable suddenly becomes beatable, and who is watching closest to decide if it matters? That question leads us to the next layer of this story, because to truly understand why this missed cut sent shockwaves far beyond the leaderboard, you have to understand just how rare this kind of failure actually is. 78 straight cuts. Do you know who else has done that? Tiger Woods, 142. Byron Nelson, 113. Jack Nicklaus, 105. That is the company Scheffler was keeping. Top 5 all time. Right up there with the legends. For almost 4 years, Scottie Scheffler showed up on Thursday and Friday, and you could set your watch to his presence on the weekend. He was not just the best player in the world, he was the most dependable, the guy you could count on, no matter the course, no matter the weather, no matter the pressure. That kind of reliability does not happen by accident. It is built on a swing that repeats like a machine, a short game that saves par from impossible places, a mental game that treats a bogey like a minor inconvenience. Sponsors look at that and see safety. They see a return on investment that almost never wavers. Because when you are a major global brand, you do not just pay for talent, you pay for exposure. You pay for the player who is on television every Sunday, the player who is in the conversation every single week, the player who makes your logo visible to millions of eyeballs, round after round, tournament after tournament. That is the real value of a streak like this. It is not just about pride or history. It is about presence. It is about being the name that stays in the headlines, the face that stays on the screen, the guarantee that your investment is working every single week of the season. And when that guarantee suddenly disappears on a Friday afternoon in Scotland, the people writing those checks start to wonder. They start to calculate. They start to ask the uncomfortable questions that every investor eventually asks when their sure thing stops being sure. Here is the reality that most fans do not think about. Scottie Scheffler does not just make money from winning tournaments. He makes a massive fortune from his sponsorships. That is not prize money. That is the money that shows up in his bank account regardless of whether he lifts a trophy on Sunday. An 8-figure sum, every single year, from apparel, from equipment, from watches, from private jets, from banks. That is the empire we talked about at the start. And that empire is built on a simple promise, that Scottie Scheffler is the safest bet in golf. Now, let us break down who is actually paying that money. Because when you look at the portfolio, you start to understand just how much is riding on every single swing. We are talking about the biggest names in the sporting goods industry. The company that covers his feet, his torso, his hats. Every time he walks down the fairway, their logo is visible to millions. They pay him to be the face of their golf division, and they pay him well. Then there is the equipment manufacturer. He uses their driver, their irons, their wedges, their ball. Every club in his bag except the putter comes from them. That is a massive endorsement, because when the world #1 uses your equipment, everyone else wants to buy it. The luxury watchmaker is next. The crown, the prestige. They do not just sponsor anyone, they sponsor champions. Scheffler wearing that timepiece on his wrist signals excellence, timeless success. That image is worth millions to them. A private aviation company covers his travel. Banks are also on the list, adding to that annual fortune. But here is the thing about these deals. They are not just handed out, they are contracts. And contracts have clauses, performance clauses, appearance clauses, behavior clauses, the fine print that most players never think about until something goes wrong. Now, do these contracts say, if you miss one cut, we take back our money? Of course not. That would be ridiculous. But they do have language about maintaining a certain world ranking, about playing in a minimum number of events, about staying in the public eye in a positive way. So when a player misses a cut, especially a cut that breaks a historic streak, the marketing departments take notice. They start pulling up the spreadsheets. They start calculating how much airtime they lost that weekend. They start asking, if this happens again, what does that do to our return? That is the uncomfortable truth that no one wants to say out loud. Sponsors are not fans. They are investors. And investors do not like surprises, especially bad ones. Now, here is where we separate the headlines from reality. Because you have probably seen the stories popping up online. Sponsors demand answers. A massive deal at risk. It sounds dramatic. It sounds like boardroom panic. But is any of that actually true? The honest answer is no, not yet. The apparel giant did not send a private jet to Scotland to haul Scheffler into a conference room. The watchmaker did not call his agent demanding an explanation for a missed 6-foot putt. That is not how this works. But here is how it does work. Quietly, behind closed doors, with phone calls that do not make the news. When a player misses a cut, the marketing team immediately reviews the campaign calendar. Print ads featuring that player get pulled for the following week. Commercial spots get rescheduled. Social media content gets revised. The player is still the face of the brand, but the visibility drops. And when visibility drops, the value of that sponsorship, at least for that specific weekend, decreases. Now, imagine you are the vice president of marketing for a global brand. You have budgeted millions to feature Scottie Scheffler in your biggest campaign of the year. You have booked airtime. You have printed posters. You have planned events. And then he misses the cut on Friday. Suddenly, your campaign is missing its centerpiece. That is not a crisis, but it is an inconvenience. And if that inconvenience happens more than once, it becomes a pattern. And patterns are what trigger real conversations about the value of the deal. The other factor is something called the A-Rod clause. It is named after Alex Rodriguez, the baseball player who had a massive contract that included performance incentives. If a player's performance drops below a certain threshold, the sponsor has the right to renegotiate. It is not a termination. It is a recalibration. Scheffler's contracts almost certainly have similar language, nothing that would be triggered by one missed cut. But if his world ranking starts to slip, or if he stops winning majors, those clauses start to look more relevant, and that is where the real risk lies. So the demand for answers that the headlines are shouting about, that is not a demand for excuses. It is a demand for reassurance. Sponsors want to know, was this a freak accident, or is this the beginning of something worse? That brings us to the real moment of truth. The British Open at Royal Birkdale. Because if Scotland was the warning shot, Birkdale is the battlefield. Here is why. Scheffler is the defending champion. He won last year in dramatic fashion. He knows the course. He knows the pressure. He knows what it takes to lift that claret jug. And if he misses the cut there too, back-to-back weekends without a Saturday tee time, that is when the narrative shifts from bad week to serious concern. Let us paint that scenario for a moment. Imagine it is Friday evening at Birkdale. The wind is howling off the Irish Sea. The scores are high, the cut line is tight, and Scottie Scheffler is standing over a putt to make the weekend. He misses. Again, the camera zooms in on his face. No emotion, just a quiet walk to the scoring tent. The media goes into overdrive. The social media algorithms light up. And the sponsorship boardrooms start having the conversations they were hoping to avoid, because 2 missed cuts in a row, for a player of his caliber, that is not a blip. That is a trend. And trends change how investors view the asset. In the corporate world, a 10% drop in a stock price makes people nervous. A 20% drop makes people panic. Now, apply that logic to Scheffler's brand valuation. Sports marketing experts estimate that if he flops at the British Open, his endorsement value could take a 15 to 20% haircut. And remember, we are talking about an 8-figure annual income. 15 to 20% of that is real money, even for the world number one. So the missed cut in Scotland was the smoke. The British Open is the fire. And if the fire catches, those sponsors are not going to demand answers in the way the headlines imagine. They are going to demand results. Quietly, professionally, with lawyers and agents and renegotiation tables. That is the real stake. Not a single contract being torn up, but a slow erosion of value that starts with one bad Friday and accelerates with a second. Now, let us talk about the man at the center of all this. Because Scottie Scheffler is not a robot. He is not a machine, despite how he swings. He is a human being who just experienced a very public failure. And here is what makes him different from so many other athletes. He did not make excuses. When the media surrounded him after the round, he did not blame the divot on 8. He did not blame the wind. He did not blame the course setup. He blamed himself. His exact words were something like this: "I didn't give myself enough chances. I didn't hit it close enough. That is why you shoot over par. That is accountability. That is ownership. And for die-hard fans, that is worth more than any apology." In a sport where ego often outweighs honesty, Scheffler's willingness to stand in front of the cameras and admit his own failures is rare. It is why fans respect him. It is also why sponsors respect him, because authenticity is a brand value that cannot be bought. But let us be clear about one thing. Authenticity does not pay the bills. Performance pays the bills. And Scheffler knows that better than anyone. He also knows that the only way to silence the doubters is to show up at Birkdale and prove that this was just one bad Friday in a career full of brilliant Sundays. He said it himself. He plans to learn from this, to come back stronger, to use this failure as fuel. That is the competitor's mindset. That is the champion's mindset. And for now, that is enough to keep the sponsors from panicking. But the clock is ticking. The British Open is next. And the world will be watching to see if the world number one can bounce back, or if the cracks in the empire are wider than anyone realized. So where does that leave us? What is the verdict on that enormous sponsorship empire? Here is the truth. The deal is not dead. It is not even seriously wounded. It is just exposed. The missed cut in Scotland was a small crack in the dam, but dams do not collapse from one small crack. They collapse when the water keeps rising. That water is the pressure of expectation, the pressure to win, the pressure to perform, the pressure to justify every dollar that brands invest in your name. Scheffler has lived under that pressure for years, and he has thrived. But now, for the first time in a long time, he has shown that he is human. Sponsors are watching, calculators in hand. They are asking themselves the same question that every fan is asking. Was this a blip, or was this a sign? The answer will come at Royal Birkdale. If he makes the cut, if he contends, if he reminds everyone why he is number one, the narrative shifts back to unlucky week. The sponsors breathe a sigh of relief. The empire stays intact, but if he misses again, if the streak of failure extends to 2, the conversations change. The whispers become voices. The boardrooms become active. And that is when the real demand for answers begins. Not in the headlines, not in the press conferences, but in the quiet, ruthless world of corporate finance, where sentiment is the only currency that really matters. So here is my final take. Scottie Scheffler has built a reputation that can survive one bad weekend. He has earned enough goodwill to get the benefit of the doubt. But goodwill has an expiration date, and that date is the Friday afternoon at the British Open. Do you think he bounces back at Birkdale, or is this the beginning of a real unraveling? Drop your view in the comments. And if you made it this far, hit subscribe, because when we find out what happens at the Open, you will want to be here for the fallout.